Welcome dear students to yet another class on English language and literature. We are considering the British history in the early 20th century. One very important topic that we need to dwell on as we discuss the early 20th century is the First World War. Now this is quite an important topic from the point of view of the examination, so please study this particular topic well. The First World War. The First World War was fought between 28th July 1914 to 11th November 1918. The First World War is also known as the Great War or the Global War or the War to End All Wars. The First World War, as I said, fought between 28th July 1914 to 11th November 1918, was described as the war to end all wars. It was one of the largest and deadliest wars in history. Now, why it is known as the Great War? The Great War. Now, the first reason to be known as the Great War is the number of people died in the war was very huge. Approximately 17 million people died in the war. Out of these, 11 million were soldiers and 6 million were civilians. And approximately 20 million people were wounded in the war. It was one of the deadliest conflicts in the history of the world, the Great War. The second reason why we call it the Great War is there were many countries at war. The Allied powers were Russia, France and Britain. USA, Japan and Serbia will join later. The central powers were Austria-Hungary Empire, Germany and the Ottoman Empire. So a lot of countries participated in this Great War. What were the causes for the First World War? There were many causes for the Great War. Before discussing the immediate cause, we shall see what are the underlying causes. The first cause we can say is militarism. Now, militarism was an important cause of the war. The countries were on an arm race or army race or weapon race. The arm race was speeded up by the Industrial Revolution that began in England. Machine guns, navy ships and large-scale armies were maintained with the aim of gaining supremacy in the world. The leaders of militarism were Britain and Germany. That was the first cause, militarism. The second cause is alliance system. Now, most countries of the period had secret alliances. These alliances were meant to help each other in times of adversities, difficulties, threat from other nations. Two main treaty systems that were prominent during the time were: one, the Triple Alliance of 1882. The Triple Alliance was among the three countries, Germany, Italy and Austria-Hungary. And there was the Triple Entente of 1907. It was among France, Britain and Russia. So, alliance system. The third one is imperialism. The Western countries were competing with one another to build colonies. The countries that were in the race to build colonies were Spain, Portugal, France, England, Belgium, etc. And England was the leader. Almost 25% of the whole world was under the control of the British Empire. They had vast resources and manpower in their disposal. India would supply almost 13 lakh soldiers to fight for Britain in the First World War. The fourth reason was nationalism. The nationalist wave swept Europe in the 19th century. Each country wanted to be a sovereign power. It was a time that witnessed the unification of many countries like Italy, Germany, Baltic states, etc. And it was war that unified a country or made a new country. Thus we see an atmosphere where the war is glorified. So my dear students, these above mentioned causes can be considered as the underlying causes for the First World War, the deep-seated causes. There were other causes as well. Russia wanted to keep its influence in the Baltic states. The Ottoman Empire also wanted its supremacy in the Baltic states. Thus there was fight for influence by Russia, Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary in the Baltic states for supremacy and influence. My dear friends, the immediate cause for the breakout of the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife by Bosnian nationalists Gavrilo Princip and other members of the Black Hand. In Sarajevo, on 28 June 1914, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated. They were on a holiday tour, and he was son of the king's brother and the next in the line for the throne. So the Archduke was assassinated. Bosnia was part of Austria-Hungary, but some Bosnians were fighting to have an independent kingdom. So Bosnians were fighting for independence. Now those who were fighting for an independent kingdom belonged to an organization called Black Hand, and Black Hand was supported by Serbia. So this is the immediate cause for the breakout of the First World War. So the Bosnian nationalists, Gavrilo Princip, and the members of the Black Hand assassinated the Archduke with the knowledge of Serbia. So after the assassination, the Austria-Hungary sent a humiliating threat to Serbia to surrender to the authority of Austria-Hungary. But Serbia considered it as an insult and would seek support from Russia. So in the meantime, Austria-Hungary got support from Germany. Austria-Hungary and Germany declared war on Serbia. Russia declared war on Germany, and France also declared war on Germany. Italy will join later, France and Russia. Italy will join France and Russia later. Now this happened in the month of July, and it is termed as the July Crisis. The July Crisis was a month-long chain reaction of events that followed the assassination of Austrian-Hungary heir Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on 28 June 1914. It began with an Austrian ultimatum to Serbia and ended with the declaration of war by the great powers of Europe. The July Crisis eventually led to the First World War. As the war progressed, several countries were drawn into it. In the beginning, thousands of young men, burning with patriotic zeal, volunteered for the armed forces. What began as patriotism against the tyranny of the Kaiser of Germany ended in a nightmare in which almost an entire nation was killed on the Western forefront. Britain was greatly affected. Her economy also was shaken. So what were the impacts of the First World War? We have just discussed World War. What was the impacts? What were the impacts of the First World War? The First World War had terrible impact on the world. The war changed the world and the human perception of the whole world. The first impact was that the war changed the political landscape of several countries. Four monarchies came crashing down. There was the fall of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. We see the fall of Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. The third monarch, Emperor Charles of Austria-Hungary, he also fell. And the Ottoman Sultan Muhammad VI, he also fell. So we see the fall of four great monarchies after the First World War. Now these empires fell and new countries were carved out. Now this changed the political map of the whole world irrevocably. The second impact was that the United States of America was brought to the forefront as a country rich in natural resources and with tremendous political influence. Britain was slowly receding to the background. Britain was receding. The third impact was the social changes that took place. The war also brought about some social changes. During the war, there was a shortage of the male workers in factories, and women took up the jobs of the male workers. And after the war, the women were unwilling to give up their jobs as it provided economic independence to them. The women also demanded for equal status in society. Many countries gave the right to vote for women as well. So that was a social change that took place after the war. Another social change was the blurring of class distinctions. The men who had fought the war together, who shared the same trenches and faced the same dangers during the war, they could not go back to the old social hierarchy. The power of the aristocracy was reduced, and those men who had bled for the country, shed blood for the country, were recognized as heroes and given importance in the governments. So these are some of the social changes. Now, change in the attitude towards the European civilization. There was a change in that. The superiority of the European civilization was shattered forever. Now, what was the role of Britain in the First World War? The role of Britain was that Britain served the war in two ways. First one was that Britain gave financial support to the Allied forces, France and Russia. It had a lot of economic wealth. It provided financial support. Secondly, Britain also affected the naval blockade of Germany. So that was the way Britain intervened in the war. The war entailed the loss of lives in a large scale. My dear students, the First World War was a devastating event that happened in the early part of the 20th century, and we are learning the early 20th century. The devastating effects of the First World War will affect or will influence the writers of the times, the writers of the early 20th century. Now, we shall discuss more about how the First World War influenced the writers, their poems and other literary works of the early 20th century writers in our subsequent classes. So my dear students, we are coming to the end of a particular class on the First World War. This particular topic is quite important from the point of view of examination. We have discussed about the Great War, the causes that led to the Great War, the global war. We also talked about the immediate cause of the First World War. After that, we discussed some of the important impacts that were brought about by the First World War. So we are coming to the end of this lecture. For your assignment, please write a short description or a detailed description about the First World War, the causes of the First World War, the immediate cause of the First World War, and the impacts of the First World War that was fought between 1914 and 1918. Thank you for your patient listening. Please stay safe at home. Have a nice time.